The video of Michael Steele's heated exchange with Karoline Leavitt spread like wildfire across the internet. Within hours, short clips of his emotional outburst appeared everywhere online. People couldn't stop talking about how his face had turned bright red when Karoline had pulled out those documents nobody expected her to have. "Did you see how he completely lost it?" texted one viewer to another. "I've watched him for years and never seen him that upset." News websites rushed to post headlines about the confrontation. Some called it the meltdown of the year, while others described it as Leavitt's calculated takedown. Political blogs from both sides jumped into the fray, each spinning the story to fit their own narrative. The network's phone lines lit up with viewers wanting to share their opinions. Some defended Michael, claiming he was ambushed unfairly. Others praised Karoline for doing her homework and holding him accountable. The clip reached over 2 million views by midnight. Behind the scenes, Michael sat alone in his office, tie loosened, staring at his phone as messages poured in. His press team scrambled to draft a statement, finally releasing one that read, "Today's discussion became heated due to misleading information presented out of context. Mr. Steele stands by his record of consistency and integrity in public service." Meanwhile, Karoline received calls from major news outlets requesting interviews. She appeared on a morning show the next day, looking calm and collected in a blue blazer. "I simply came prepared with facts," she explained. The public deserves transparency from their commentators. Political strategy experts weighed in on what happened. "This is a classic example of being caught off guard," explained one communications director on a podcast. "Always assume your opponents have done their research." University professors even used the clip in their journalism classes. "Notice the body language shift," pointed out one media studies teacher to her students. "See how his defensive posture begins the moment she mentions having evidence?" The network executives held an emergency meeting to discuss whether they should invite either guest back. Ratings for the segment were through the roof, but they worried about the show's reputation for civil discourse. Michael's longtime supporters created the hashtag #StandWithSteele, sharing old clips of his more composed moments and thoughtful commentary. Karoline's followers countered with the "facts matter," which trended higher by the end of the day. A week later, Michael finally addressed the incident in a written post. "In politics, passion sometimes overtakes precision. While I regret losing my cool, I don't regret standing up for what I believe. I've spent decades in public service, and yes, my views have evolved on certain issues. That's what happens when you listen and learn instead of clinging to outdated positions." Some viewers respected his honesty. Others felt it was too little, too late. The most unexpected outcome came when a communications firm created a training video using the exchange as an example of how emotions can derail even the most experienced public speakers. "Remember to breathe and stick to your talking points," advised the narrator over footage of Michael's reddening face. 3 weeks after the incident, both Michael and Karoline appeared on separate talk shows. Neither directly mentioned the confrontation, but the tension lingered in public consciousness. Whenever either name was mentioned, people immediately thought of that explosive moment when live television had revealed something raw and unscripted. As one columnist put it, "In an age of carefully crafted sound bites and rehearsed responses, viewers witnessed something increasingly rare, an authentic human reaction when someone's carefully constructed public image suddenly cracked under pressure." Whether that makes Michael Steele more relatable or less credible depends entirely on which side of the political fence you're standing on. The commercial break couldn't have come at a worse time. Michael Steele sat in his chair, adrenaline coursing through his veins, thoughts racing. The floor director counted down the seconds until they were back on air. 5, 4, 3. The last numbers were silent, just fingers in the air. Then the red light glowed again. "Welcome back to our panel discussion on White House Press Secretary Karoline Leavitt's defense of the administration's tariff policies," said the host smoothly. "Michael, before the break you were explaining your concerns with her economic claims." Steele had planned to dial it back, to return to his usual measured analysis. Those plans evaporated the moment the host played a second clip from Leavitt's briefing. "When you understand basic economics," Leavitt was saying in the clip, her tone dripping with condescension. You realize that America holds all the cards in global trade. We're simply using that leverage to benefit American workers. The clip ended and something in Steele snapped. "This isn't just wrong, it's dangerously wrong," he said, his voice rising to a level that had producers in the control room exchanging glances. "And it's exactly the kind of simplistic nonsense that leads to failed economic policies." The other panelists shifted uncomfortably. This wasn't the polite, restrained political discussion typical of primetime news. This was raw and unfiltered. For 4 years, Steele continued, leaning forward, I led the Republican Party. I worked with economists, with business leaders, with policy experts. And I can tell you without hesitation that what we heard from that podium today was economic fantasy. The host attempted to jump in, perhaps to cool things down, but the administration claims a lot of things, Steele cut in, his voice now approaching a shout. They claim tariffs are paid by foreign countries. They're not. They claim the global economy is lining up to call the White House. It's not. They claim these policies will bring manufacturing jobs flooding back to America. They won't. His hand slammed the desk for emphasis, causing water to slosh from his glass. Look, I'm not some left-wing economist. I'm a Reagan Republican. I believe in free markets, I believe in American competitiveness, but I also believe in telling the American people the truth about how tariffs actually work. The camera pulled in closer on Steele's face, capturing every flicker of emotion. His eyes were intense, his jaw set, the veins in his neck visible. When the price of your refrigerator goes up by $200 because of these tariffs, that's not China paying. That's you paying. When farmers can't sell their soybeans because of retaliatory tariffs, that's not winning, that's losing. The control room was electric. The producer whispered urgently into the host's earpiece, "Stay with Steele. This is gold." Across America, viewers who might normally change channels during policy discussions were frozen, captivated by the raw emotion on display. And what makes this even more infuriating, Steele continued, his voice cracking slightly with genuine feeling, is the absolute confidence with which these economic falsehoods are being peddled to the American people. He gestured toward the monitor that had played Leavitt's clip. The youngest press secretary in history stands at that podium looking down at experienced economic journalists and lectures them about basic economics, while saying things that would fail an Econ 101 exam. It's not just wrong, it's insulting to the intelligence of every American. Social media was already lighting up. Clips were being shared in real time, with comments ranging from, "Steele completely loses it on MSNBC," to, "Finally someone telling the truth about tariffs." The partisan divide in America was playing out in YouTube comments and Twitter replies, even as Steele continued his tirade. "And the worst part," he said, barely pausing for breath, "the absolute worst part is that the people who will be hurt most by these policies are the very working-class Americans the administration claims to be helping." For a brief moment, vulnerability flashed across his face, genuine concern that transcended partisan politics. Those factory workers in Ohio and Michigan and Pennsylvania who are promised that tariffs will bring their jobs back? They're being sold a bill of goods. The jobs that left for China 20 years ago aren't coming back because of tariffs. Those jobs don't even exist anymore. They've been automated. The host, sensing a slight softening in Steele's tone, tried again to redirect. "So you're saying the administration is being deliberately misleading?" That was all it took to reignite the flame. "What would you call it?" Steele demanded, throwing his hands up in exasperation. The president himself told auto executives in a private call not to raise prices because of these tariffs. He knows consumers will pay. Everyone with a basic understanding of economics knows consumers will pay. His voice had reached a volume rarely heard on evening news programs. And then we have to sit here and watch the press secretary tell the American people with a straight face that the entire world is calling America not China. It's gaslighting. The host made a cutting motion with his hand, signaling a need to wrap it up before the segment ran long. But Steele wasn't finished. "The Emperor has no clothes," he declared, ignoring the signals. "And someone needs to say it. These tariffs are a tax on American consumers, plain and simple. They're not making America great again. They're making everyday goods more expensive for working families." As the host finally managed to thank Steele and transition to the next segment, the former RNC chairman sat back in his chair, somewhat stunned by his own vehemence. In all his years of political commentary, he'd never lost composure like this. What had happened? In the control room, producers were already preparing clips for social media. "Get the gaslighting clip ready to go immediately," ordered the executive producer. "And I want the Emperor has no clothes soundbite for the morning shows." Steele removed his microphone after the segment ended. His phone was already buzzing with notifications. Former colleagues, journalists, even old friends from his RNC days were texting, some in support, others in criticism. "Did I go too far?" he asked a producer as he left the set. She shook her head. "That wasn't commentary, Michael. That was a moment. By morning, everyone in America will be talking about it." She was right. By the time Steele reached his car in the parking garage, clips of his outburst had already been viewed hundreds of thousands of times. Conservative outlets were branding it a meltdown, while liberal sites praised it as speaking truth to power. What no one yet knew was how the White House, and specifically Karoline Leavitt, would respond. That reaction would take this already explosive situation and turn it into one of the most memorable political media confrontations of the year. The MSNBC studios buzzed with pre-show energy. Producers huddled around monitors, interns rushed with last-minute script changes, and makeup artists made final touches on the talent. Another day in the never-ending news cycle of Washington politics. In the green room, Michael Steele scrolled through his phone, reviewing headlines. At 66, the former RNC chairman had seen it all, or so he thought. His transformation from Republican Party leader to MSNBC political analyst reflected the changing tides of American politics. Once, he'd been the first African American to chair the Republican National Committee. Now he was often the voice criticizing the very party he'd once led. "5 minutes, Mr. Steele," called a production assistant, poking her head through the door. Steele nodded, slipping his phone into his pocket. He straightened his tie and took a deep breath. Tonight's show would focus on the White House press briefing from earlier that day, specifically Press Secretary Karoline Leavitt's defense of President Trump's tariff policies. As a fiscal conservative, Steele had strong opinions about tariffs, opinions that often put him at odds with the current administration. "We're getting clips ready now," said his producer, as Steele took his seat on set. "The Leavitt segment is second block." Under the hot studio lights, Steele settled into the familiar rhythm of television. The opening segments went smoothly. Discussion of congressional negotiations, a brief international news update, polling numbers for upcoming special elections. Standard political fare. Then came the tariff segment. "Coming up," said the host, White House Press Secretary Karoline Leavitt made some bold claims about the administration's tariff policies today. Our panel will break down what this means for your wallet after this break. During the commercial, Steele reviewed his notes. He'd planned to be measured, analytical, his usual approach, but something about Leavitt's briefing had gotten under his skin in a way few political performances did anymore. "Back in 30 seconds, called the floor director. The red light on camera 1 lit up, and they were back. "Welcome back," said the host. Today, White House Press Secretary Karoline Leavitt defended the administration's new round of tariffs during a contentious briefing. Let's take a look. The monitor played the clip of Leavitt's most quotable moment. "The entire world is calling the United States of America, not China, because they need our markets." Steele felt his temperature rising as he watched. The confidence with which she delivered what he considered economic nonsense was staggering. "Michael," the host turned to him, "as former RNC chairman and someone who's been vocal about fiscal policy, what's your take on Leavitt's defense of these tariffs?" Steele intended to start with his usual measured analysis, he really did. But what came out instead surprised even him. "What the hell is she talking about?" he blurted. his voice rising with genuine disbelief. The host's eyebrows shot up. Steele was known for his candor, but this raw reaction was unusual even for him. "I'm sorry," Steele continued, not sounding sorry at all. "But does she not know that China and Japan and other nations are literally creating their own economic alliances without the US right now? This idea that the entire world is calling, America is completely detached from reality." The producer in the control room signaled to stay with Steele's reaction. Ratings gold was unfolding live. "You seem particularly frustrated by these comments," the host observed, expertly fanning the flames. "Because this isn't just normal political spin," Steele said, his hands now animated, punctuating each point. "This is a fundamental misrepresentation of how global economics works. Tariffs aren't paid by foreign governments. They're paid by American importers who then pass those costs on to American consumers." He leaned forward in his chair, fully engaged now. "What we saw today was what I'd call an incoherent capitulation. The president tells auto manufacturers in private not to raise prices because of tariffs, effectively admitting these costs fall on Americans, while his press secretary tells the public these tariffs are only hurting foreign countries. They can't have it both ways." The host tried to interject, perhaps to bring in another panelist, but Steele was on a roll. "Look, I've been a Republican my entire life. I believe in free markets. I believe in capitalism. What I don't believe in is misleading the American people about who pays for tariffs. When the price of your washing machine goes up by $100, that's not China paying. That's you paying." The veins in his neck were visible now, his passion undeniable. This wasn't the calm, analytical Michael Steele viewers were accustomed to. This was a man genuinely concerned about economic policy being misrepresented to the American public. "The administration keeps saying these tariffs will bring manufacturing back to America. But where's the evidence? During the first round of tariffs in the previous Trump administration, did we see a manufacturing renaissance? No. We saw higher prices for consumers and retaliatory tariffs that hurt American farmers and exporters." Steele picked up his water glass, took a quick sip, but couldn't slow himself down. "And this idea that tariffs are somehow leveling the playing field? The global economy doesn't work that way anymore. Products aren't made in just one country. They cross borders multiple times during production. These simplistic us versus them economic narratives might sound good in a press briefing, but they don't reflect the reality of modern global trade." The control room was buzzing. Producers were already cutting clips for social media, knowing Steele's passionate critique would generate millions of views by morning. The raw emotion the expertise delivered with unfiltered frustration. It was compelling television. To hear the White House press secretary stand there and claim with a straight face that the entire world is calling us, not China. It's just... Steele shook his head, momentarily at a loss for words. "It's just wrong. Demonstrably, factually wrong." As the segment ended and they cut to commercial, Steele sat back in his chair, somewhat surprised by his own vehemence. He'd been in politics. For decades had seen countless press briefings filled with spin and selective facts. What was it about this one that had triggered such a strong reaction? Perhaps it was seeing economic principles he'd defended his entire career being so casually misrepresented. Perhaps it was frustration with his former party's abandonment of free market principles. Or perhaps it was simply the confidence with which Leavitt had delivered claims that contradicted economic reality as he understood it. Whatever the reason, Michael Steele had just delivered one of the most memorable moments of political commentary of the year, and by morning everyone would be talking about it, including the White House. Rain pattered against the windows of the White House briefing room as reporters shuffled in, shaking water from their coats and umbrellas. The weather matched the mood in Washington, gray, unsettled, with tensions brewing beneath the surface. For weeks, business leaders, economists, and everyday Americans had been debating President Trump's new round of tariffs. Today, they expected answers. Karoline Leavitt entered precisely at 1:06 p.m., her leather portfolio clutched close to her chest. The room quieted immediately. Something in her posture told the veterans this wasn't going to be an ordinary briefing. "Good afternoon," she began, her voice calm but with an unmistakable edge. "Before we start, I'd like to address the misinformation being spread about the president's economic policies. In the third row, Janet from Bloomberg News straightened. Economic policy was her beat, and she'd written a scathing piece just yesterday about how the tariffs would impact consumer prices. President Trump's tariff strategy is working exactly as intended, Leavitt continued, making deliberate eye contact with specific reporters known for their critical coverage. Foreign leaders are calling us, not the other way around. They understand. America holds the economic power now. A hand shot up from the second row. Bill from the Washington Post wasn't waiting to be called on. Karoline, retailers are already announcing price increases due to these tariffs. Amazon briefly considered labeling products with tariff costs before backing down. How can you claim this isn't affecting American consumers? The room tensed. Bill's question wasn't just pointed. It was challenging the entire administration. Narrative. Some reporters glanced at each other, waiting for the explosion. Instead, Leavitt smiled. It wasn't a warm smile. That's a great question, Bill, because it highlights exactly how the media misunderstands basic economics, she said, her tone sweetly condescending. These tariffs aren't attacks on Americans. They're attacks on foreign governments that have been defrauding us for decades. Cameras clicked rapidly. This was the soundbite they'd been waiting for, the one that would lead evening broadcasts and morning headlines. And Leavitt knew it. But that contradicts what most economists, Bill began. Most economists work for universities and think, tanks that have been wrong about President Trump from day one, she interjected, not allowing him to finish. The president has created more jobs and economic growth than any of them predicted. Perhaps they should focus on understanding why they've been so consistently wrong instead of criticizing policies that are working. The room erupted with raised hands and shouted follow-ups. Leavitt pointed to a friendly face from a conservative outlet. Can you explain exactly how these tariffs benefit American workers specifically? The reporter asked, offering her a softball. Leavitt nodded appreciatively. When foreign companies have to pay tariffs, it levels the playing field for American manufacturers. Companies start thinking, why pay tariffs when we could just build in America? That creates jobs here, not overseas. It's that simple. But simplicity was exactly what economists had been arguing against. The global supply chain was far more complex than the administration suggested. Components crossed borders multiple times before becoming finished products. No reporter in the room believed it was that simple. Not really. From the back, a voice called out without being recognized. The Wall Street Journal reported this morning that major manufacturers are already passing tariff costs directly to consumers. How is that not a tax on Americans? Leavitt's eyes narrowed, locating the culprit, a young reporter she didn't immediately recognize. When you shop for clothes, do you always buy the most expensive option, or do you look for value? She asked, her voice deliberately slower now, as if explaining to a child. Markets adjust, competition happens. If one company raises prices too high, consumers shop elsewhere. That's how free markets work. The condescension wasn't subtle, but it was effective in making the reporter shrink back slightly. Old Washington hands recognized the technique, a version of the "how dare you ask such a stupid question" approach that had worked for press secretaries for decades. For nearly 20 minutes, the pattern continued. Questions about economic hardship were deflected. Concerns from business leaders were dismissed as self-interested whining. Every challenge was met with unwavering confidence, even when the facts seemed shaky. Then came the moment that would trigger the avalanche. "Karoline," called out a veteran reporter from the front row. The president himself said in a private call with automakers last month that they better not raise prices in response to these tariffs. Doesn't that admission itself confirm that he knows Americans will ultimately pay these costs? The room went silent. This wasn't supposed to be public knowledge. The reporter had clearly spoken to someone who was on that call. For the briefest moment, perhaps only half a second, Leavitt's composure cracked. A flash of uncertainty crossed her face before she regained control. But the cameras caught it. That momentary hesitation would be replayed, analyzed, and dissected on news programs for days. "The president speaks with business leaders constantly," she replied, her voice slightly tighter than before. The entire world is calling the United States of America, not China, because they need our markets. If companies choose to raise prices unnecessarily, that's their decision. But they should know consumers have choices too. She gathered her papers. One last question, she said, pointing to a friendly face from a right-leaning outlet. Is the administration concerned about potential retaliation from China or the EU over these tariffs? Leavitt's smile returned. America doesn't fear retaliation when we're standing up for fair trade. For decades, presidents of both parties let other countries walk all over us. Those days are over. With that, she closed her folder. Thank you, all, she said, turning to leave as reporters shouted more questions. As the door closed behind her, she didn't know that her words were already being clipped for the evening news, particularly her claim about the entire world calling America. Among those who would see that clip was former RNC chairman Michael Steele, now an MSNBC commentator, who would find her economic assertions not just wrong, but infuriating enough to trigger one of the most memorable television moments of the year. The Washington winter morning was cold, but inside the White House briefing room things were heating up. Karoline Leavitt walked confidently to the podium, her blonde hair perfectly styled, her outfit impeccable. At just 27 years old, she wasn't supposed to be here, not yet anyway. But life had other plans for the girl from small-town New Hampshire. "Good afternoon, everybody," she said, her voice steady as cameras clicked and reporters settled in their seats. Some of the veteran journalists exchanged glances. This wasn't their first rodeo with a White House press secretary, but Leavitt was different. She was the youngest person ever to hold this position, and she knew many of them still underestimated her. That was their first mistake. Growing up in Atkinson, New Hampshire, Karoline's childhood had been typical American small-town life. Her family owned an ice cream stand, her father ran a used truck dealership, and she played softball in high school. Nothing about her beginnings screamed future White House press secretary. But those who knew her well weren't surprised by her rise. Determination had always been her defining quality. "The president has been very clear about this," she stated firmly, responding to a particularly pointed question about foreign policy. The reporter tried to interrupt, but Leavitt wasn't having it. "If you'd let me finish," she said with a slight edge to her voice that made the room go quiet. The reporter sat back, momentarily stunned. Her journey to this podium had been meteoric, but not without bumps. After graduating from St. Anselm College, where she'd been the self-described token conservative on campus, she'd landed an internship in the Trump White House Correspondence Office in 2020. From there, she became an assistant press secretary under Kayleigh McEnany, learning the ropes of a job she would one day hold herself. But then came the 2020 election results, and suddenly Leavitt was out of a job. Most 23-year-olds might have been crushed by such a career setback, but not her. She pivoted quickly, becoming communications director for Congresswoman Elise Stefanik, soaking up knowledge from another powerful Republican woman. The hunger for more responsibility gnawed at her, though. In 2022, she shocked the political world by announcing her run for Congress in New Hampshire's 1st District. Though she won the Republican primary, she lost the general election. For many, that would have been the end of the story, a young, political hopeful who reached too high too soon. Instead, it was just another chapter. "Tom, I've already addressed that 3 times today," she said sharply to a reporter who'd asked a repeated question about tariff policies. "Perhaps you should pay closer attention." Several supporters in the room suppressed smiles. This was what they loved about her: the fearlessness, the refusal to play by the old Washington rulebook. When President Trump secured his 2nd term in 2024, he remembered the loyal, sharp-minded young woman who had defended him fiercely during his first administration. Despite having just given birth to her son in July 2024, Leavitt barely took time off when offered a campaign position. She was back at work just days after Trump survived an assassination attempt, showcasing a dedication that impressed even her critics. Her appointment as press secretary in January 2025 sent shockwaves through Washington. Many questioned if someone so young could handle such a pressure cooker position. Those doubts melted away after her first briefing, which supporters called a masterclass and opponents grudgingly admitted was impressively handled. What this administration has accomplished in just its first weeks is historic by any measure, she said, her voice rising with conviction as she listed achievements. The room was split, half nodding in agreement, half scribbling notes for their skeptical articles later. But all were paying attention. Behind the scenes, Leavitt's life was a juggling act. A new mother married to a husband 32 years her senior, she balanced midnight feedings with 5 a.m. briefing preps. Staffers reported seeing her reviewing talking points while gently rocking her infant son. Critics claimed she was too inexperienced for the job, but supporters pointed to her handling of tough questions as proof she was more than qualified. Her early performances in the briefing room quickly made her a social media sensation. Clips of her sharp responses to challenging questions went viral regularly. "She's like the fake news Grim Reaper," one supporter tweeted after she shut down a particularly aggressive line of questioning. Others compared her style to a chess player, always thinking several moves ahead. What many didn't see was the careful preparation behind each appearance. Hours spent studying policy details, rehearsing potential questions, anticipating attacks. Nothing about Leavitt's success was accidental. "I'll take one more question," she announced, pointing to a reporter in the back row known for softball questions. A tactical choice. End on a high note. As she wrapped up and gathered her folders, she made eye contact with several key reporters, a subtle reminder that she recognized who was fair and who wasn't. The message was clear. She was keeping score. Walking away from the podium after another successful briefing, Leavitt allowed herself a small smile. The journey from New Hampshire ice cream stand to White House briefing room had been unlikely, but here she was, and she was just getting started. Little did she know that one of her upcoming briefings would trigger a chain of events that would put her in a direct collision course with Michael Steele, former RNC chairman turned MSNBC commentator, in a confrontation that would soon captivate the political world.